It was one of the deadliest colonial atrocities in history, and most people have never heard of it. Late in the 19th century, European powers were carving up Africa, swallowing up its vast riches and subjugating its people. But one small section of the Congo rainforest was owned by no one until King Leopold II of Belgium claimed it as his own. In 1885, he founded the Congo Free State, a private colony within Africa ruled like a medieval fiefdom and dedicated entirely to his personal profit. Leopold managed this domain through fearsome agents like Edmund Carton, who spearheaded an extreme campaign of forced labor, torture, and mass murder. The plan was simple: obtain as much rubber and ivory as possible, regardless of the cost. And the cost was horrific. Historian Adam Hochschild estimates that at least 10 million people died during this period. Whole villages were depopulated, families destroyed, and millions sent into the afterlife via the infamous bang sight, a method of execution that involved slicing off a victim's limbs while they were still alive. But even though it sounds straight out of a horror movie, many of the king's subjects didn't even realize they were being killed. How could this be? Well, Leopold managed to keep his abuses hidden from the outside world for decades. That is, until missionaries and reporters uncovered the truth and brought it back to Europe. Their discoveries caused an international incident that would lead to the birth of modern human rights movements, forced the Belgian government to take over the Congo, and change the course of world history forever. Okay, before we get into how the world reacted to the atrocities taking place in the Congo, let's talk about what was actually happening there. As you'll see, the brutality of the regime was absolutely astounding. In 1885, King Leopold II of Belgium claimed the Congo rainforest as his personal property, founding the Congo Free State, a private colony within Africa ruled like a medieval fiefdom. His advisors, like the infamous Edmund Carton, planned to turn the region into a source of personal wealth, extracting as much rubber and ivory as possible. To do so, they created brutal work camps where workers were forced to tap rubber trees all day long. They also built giant gallows where those who didn't meet their quotas were hanged. The system worked like this: each worker had to fill out a card when they came to work. On it was a number representing their daily quota. If a worker didn't collect enough rubber, they got beaten. If they still hadn't collected enough, their fingers were chopped off. If they were still short, their legs were cut off. And if they still hadn't met the quota, well, they were executed. This process was called booting, and it happened all throughout the colony. Children were put to work as young as 10 years old, and adults were regularly whipped, tortured, and starved. There was also a bounty placed on human body parts. For example, a hand could be turned in for 25 francs, an ear for 1 franc, or a foot for 4 francs. What this meant is that people's hands were often cut off without even getting paid for it. And if this wasn't bad enough, people would often get ambushed on their way home from work by members of the force public, the brutal colonial military force led by the likes of Captain Dankwart. Once they reached their victims' villages, they would set them ablaze, killing anyone who tried to escape. The result was absolute devastation. By 1908, the population of the Congo had been reduced by nearly half. Millions had died from beatings, executions, and starvation, and countless others had been captured and enslaved. But despite the Congo's reputation for being lawless and savage, a few brave souls stood against the regime. One of these was a man named Roger Coquelhot, Belgian journalist who went to the Congo in 1898 to report on its natural wonders. But once he arrived, he witnessed the true horrors of the colony firsthand, including men having their hands chopped off, women and children working in the fields, and entire villages burned to the ground. Shocked and disgusted, he wrote back to Belgium, hoping someone would listen. Luckily for Roger, he found a willing ear in the editor of a popular Brussels newspaper, who published Roger's stories exposing the atrocities taking place in the Congo. Suddenly, thanks to one man's bravery and another man's willingness to speak out, the rest of the world began to learn about what was happening in the Congo. At first, King Leopold tried to cover up the truth, sending his own agents to assassinate Roger and his editor. But soon he realized that it was too late. Other journalists and missionaries had already begun to uncover the truth. For example, in 1904, a Scottish missionary named Alexander de Lumbra visited a village in the Congo and found it completely deserted. After speaking to locals in a nearby town, he learned that every single person from the village had been marched into the forest at gunpoint and never returned. Around the same time, a British explorer named Sir Harry Johnston traveled through the Congo and encountered a group of women whose hands and feet had been cut off. He also came across a massive graveyard filled with people who had been executed for failing to meet their rubber quotas. These reports spread across Europe, causing an international incident that forced Belgium to take action. The country first dispatched a fact-finding mission to the Congo to assess the situation, but they were denied access to the areas where atrocities were believed to be taking place. So instead, they did something incredibly shady. They decided to visit a village that had been completely abandoned and use it as proof that everything was fine. Luckily, a British MP named Charles Lucas suspected something was wrong and demanded that the official reports be made public. When he read them, he noticed that the mission had failed to speak to anyone in the villages, instead focusing on a ghost town. Outraged, he took the matter to the House of Commons, denouncing the Belgian government's inaction and calling for the Congo to be placed under international control. But despite the evidence being undeniable, King Leopold refused to back down. He continued to ignore pleas from his people and the international community, instead clinging to power and refusing to relinquish control of the Congo. This was a huge mistake, because soon he would face an even bigger problem. In 1908, he suffered a debilitating stroke that left him paralyzed and unable to rule. With the king incapacitated, Belgium took control of the Congo and ended the brutal regime that had been oppressing its people for decades. But even though the atrocities had come to an end, the damage was done. The Congo had been decimated by forced labor and violence. Its people had been brutalized and millions had been killed. Despite this, the Congo persevered. In the years since then, the country has made great strides toward recovery. But its history remains a dark stain on Africa's past and a reminder of the continent's colonial past. So why hasn't everyone heard of this genocide? Well, for several reasons. First, the story of the Congo Free State has been whitewashed by Western historians who minimized or outright ignored the atrocities that occurred there. Second, many people in colonizing countries feel guilty about their nation's colonial past and don't want to learn more about it. Finally, the story of the Congo is not taught in most schools, meaning that most people learn very little about this horrific genocide. The legacy of the Congo Free State can still be felt today. The country's infrastructure was devastated by forced labor and violence, and its people have been living with the aftermath of this genocide for generations. Despite this, the Congolese people are resilient and the country is making strides toward recovery. But the scars of Leopold's empire are still visible. We just have to know where to look. If you haven't already subscribed, please do. It's free and helps bring these videos to more people. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.